Hi, I'm Lucia. I'm with Joe and Bia and Louis, who must be somewhere in the call, part of the organising team, along with many others like Eve and Kate and Polly as well. I guess my contribution to today is to talk through the different the workshop framework, I guess is the name we've given it. So I think I'll just share the presentation and go through that. Okay. Sorry, I'm suddenly having been sat watching all those amazing presentations for the last couple of hours and now having to speak feels really, really weird.
Yeah, sorry, it's like speaking to an empty room, but I assure you were here and listening. So
okay, good. I can just have a miniature of Joe's face and speak to you. Perfect. So as I'm sure you're mostly aware, today as well as our third common workshop, and kind of together with an amazing lineup of speakers, we're also launching the open call for workshops, or the kind of early open call for workshops. So the aim of the presentation is to kind of introduce, especially for those who are not so familiar with EASA, and for those who have been to EASA, to remind you a little bit of how workshops usually run and how we'd like to see workshops take place during next year's event at the EASA Commons. It's worth saying for those who don't know that workshops make up the vast majority of the time in EASA, and it's through workshops that we come to understand a lot of the theme that the EASA itself is tackling, and that every participant takes part in at least one workshop over the 2 weeks of the assembly. And the kind of workshops both kind of research the theme and are the vehicle for all of us to understand the theme together. In a normal size EASA, or pre-pandemic EASA, there would be about 35 workshops. They vary in size between 5 to 18 participants, probably is reasonable numbers. Most of the time, workshops are led by tutors or groups of tutors, usually between 2 or 3 people. It can also be smaller or bigger. And workshops run for the entirety of the 2-long assembly most of the time. As I was saying, workshops are the route through which we interrogate the theme of the event. The 3 images on screen are, as an example, 3 workshops that ran during the EASA Tourist Assembly in 2019, where the theme was to study the impact of tourism in the landscape and the built environment. And it was in Villars-sur-Glâne in Switzerland. And these 3 workshops took really different angles into which on how to study the theme. But the 3 of them kind of contributed to a communal understanding of tourism. The theme, as I'm sure you know, for next year is commons. And as has been mentioned a lot today, it's worth remembering that commons is not a singular actor. It's not something that is just built overnight, but rather that it's an ongoing social process to practice that involves human interaction and social relations with communities. That's to say that commons is something that takes time, it takes people, it takes understanding the place and the social context in which you're operating. And so if we're looking at understanding the theme of commons, looking at running workshops that understand this, it's worth keeping in mind how we build up an understanding not just of commons as an idea or a theory, but also of the place in which we will be, which is Sheffield and the people who live in it. The aims of next year's event of EASA Commons, and so hopefully of the workshop that takes place during it, are roughly these, which are to develop and share knowledge around the themes of property rights and the commons, to further or to develop discourse around commons and the practical applications of these theories, and to use workshops as a way of establishing long-term relationships and of creating long-lasting community infrastructure that has positive social impact hopefully beyond the event of EASA, and can bring something long-term to the context of Sheffield. And as Joe and Bia were saying earlier today, that we very much see next year's event as an opportunity to experiment and develop alternative forms of practice, to take the roots of collaboration, which we so often practice within EASA, and to see how they might extend beyond the assembly or the 2 weeks in which we are together, and how we may establish alternative forms of practice, either in architecture or beyond, that can kind of expand professionally or in our student lives throughout the entire year. So I guess where all of this is, or the main ideas to take from this are to question how the workshops run during next year's EASA might embody ideas of commons like the ones we were discussing today, and how they might bring some value. They might concentrate all of the energy and all of the energy and skills that are usually come together during an EASA to create long-term value for the city that will be hosting us, which is Sheffield. In the context of all of this, we've decided to launch an early open call for ideas. That's because, I say early because usually in the EASA calendar, the call for tutors would usually happen around March, but instead by launching an early open call now, where people who might be interested in being tutors can express interest and kind of start to think about the theme, and can start to get to know both Sheffield and the people based in Sheffield. We're hoping that the workshops that come out will both be able to produce long-term value and kind of be more genuinely rooted in the social and physical context of the city. I think that's all of the points there covered, but the main idea then, by having this goal, is that you, over the next couple of months, you get feedback from us, you get feedback from the local groups with whom we've been building relationships over the last few months, and you develop any ideas that you may have for a workshop so that they're more directly linked to the theme of commons. Basically, it feels quite simple, but by thinking about something for longer, the idea might become stronger, and by getting to know the context better, the idea might fit better within the context that it's going to happen in. So as a bit of a calendar, this is 2022, this is 2023, we're here, which is the very beginning of November. The idea is that this week we launch the open call for workshops. We'll be launching a tutor pack with all of the resources to think about this. And over the next month and a half until the end of December, you can think about workshops that you may lead and kind of get to know a bit of the context. And if you feel interested, express an interest by the end of December. Over January, we'll review any initial ideas that we've received and can give a bit of feedback. And in between, or at the end of January, I think it's the first weekend of February, we're calling an ITM. ITM is the International Intermediate Tutors Meeting, which is when anyone who's thinking about being a tutor is very welcome to come in person to Sheffield to get to know the context and to kind of meet other potential tutors and hang out with us over our weekend and kind of brainstorm further about what those workshops might be. And ideally by then, if you've already started to think about the workshops and had a bit of feedback, the conversations can be much more informed and can feel like they're really becoming real. The official deadline for workshop applications is still at the end of March, as it's usually been. And you don't need to have submitted an initial idea now to apply at the end of March, but it's very much recommended that you do, because that would mean that over the next 5 months, you would have gotten to share the idea with us, talk about it, get to know the local groups with whom you might collaborate. And by the time it comes to March, have an idea for a project that is not just great as an idea, but it's also directly responding to the real needs of a real group in Sheffield or a real building in the context of Sheffield. And from there on in March, we will review all of the applications, confirm what workshops would be selected to take place in the event in August, and those workshops would kind of develop in more detail, look for material sponsorships, look for funding applications if required, and kind of continue on until the event happens in the beginning of August, or the first 2 weeks of August. I think the dates are 28th of July until 13th of August. Anyway, worth saying for anyone who gets lost during the presentation, which I wouldn't blame you for, that there's a document that compiles all of this information, which is a first draft of a tutor pack, and which will also compile all of the other resources shared today. We're aiming to launch that on the 11th, which is next Friday. So any information that you hear today will be there for you to look back onto. But mainly, the aim of this presentation, and it'll probably be quite short, is to just cover the types of workshops that could happen during the event, how we imagine those workshops might become rooted within the context of Sheffield, the timeframes in which those workshops could take place, and some other small considerations about sustainability and kind of what you need to do next if you're considering applying as a tutor or running a workshop next year. Okay, the first of those is what we've called the workshop framework. It's mainly the different types of workshops that we've identified in relation to how they relate to the context of Sheffield. And that we've divided into 4 categories, which are people, land, theory, and the EASA. On one hand, we've got workshops that are related, that are really rooted in the context of Sheffield. And as Joe was saying earlier, we've spent the last few months building relationships with local groups who are based in Sheffield and getting to know different areas of the city. Some of those groups I think will be joining later and talking about what they do. But we imagine quite a lot of the workshops taking place during the event will respond or collaborate really directly with those people or those local groups who are based in the city. Some other workshops may not be so related to people, but be related directly to different sites in the city. As Robin was discussing now, might relate to abandoned buildings, or might relate to different vacant sites in the city, and kind of quite physically make interventions in Sheffield. And then there are other types of, or opportunities for other types of workshops. Some of them more kind of classically EASA workshops around theory, or around performance, or around EASA itself. I'm going to run through them quite kind of quickly, but to give you an idea of what some of these workshops could look like, that workshops rooted in people might include working with community groups to improve the facilities, or kind of look for new facilities for the work that they do. Might be about working with campaign groups, responding to the needs of people in Sheffield, or collaborating with local artists. And workshops that are more closely working with land might look at property experiments, at claiming or acquiring land, at squatting abandoned buildings, at revealing existing ownership structures, repairing or maintaining existing buildings within the city. Of course, it's not to say that a workshop has to fall within one category. It might be that a workshop working with people is also very related to a piece of land, or that a workshop that is looking at a piece of land is then also very related to some area of theory around the commons. But that we then might look at workshops that are more related to theory of the commons, without needing to have a physical base. So there might be discussions, or there might be different types of performances, or look at digital commons, or how new forms of practice may develop on kind of a more legal or social framework. And then workshops related to EASA in itself might look at kind of providing the infrastructure of the event. And I think it's worth mentioning that when we're talking about commons and thinking of commons as shared resources, or kind of social systems for sharing common resources or common knowledge, that we can very much think of EASA in itself as a form of commons, and think of how workshops might study EASA and the assembly as a way of, or as a way of kind of furthering ideas of commons. Anyway, workshops around EASA would also include traditional workshops like EASA TV, EASA FM, EASA Archive, or Umbrella, which is the publication that happens every year within EASA. But they might also look at how EASA might expand beyond itself, which are conversations that we've been having and Bia and Joe were referring to earlier, and also at perhaps building infrastructure that can then enable the assembly to take place during the 2 weeks in August. Within the category of collaborating with local partners or local bodies, there's 3 different ways in which we could think about those collaborations. On one hand, at least I'm sure there are groups or there are collaborations that don't fall into any of these 3 categories, but this is the ones that we've identified, and kind of the large majority of the collaborations will fall into one of these 3, which is either community groups, which are doing socially minded work and have some kind of undergoing some kind of experience around land justice themselves, where the community group might set up a brief or might kind of tell us about their needs, and the workshop tutors might then develop a workshop proposal that responds to those briefs quite directly. Then local collaborators would be the case where a locally based artist or group or individual doing any other kind of work might be interested in collaborating directly with the workshop tutors. So it's not that the person based in Sheffield is setting up a brief that the workshop is responding to, but rather that together they develop a brief and kind of develop a proposal together. And then finally, technical support is the case where locally based individuals or groups kind of act as point of contact to help us deliver the projects that you might have in mind. So it might be something very technical about the use of materials or looking for a certain type of infrastructure. And this kind of by having someone who's based on the ground, these proposals can come to happen more easily. Joe, interrupt me if I'm missing something.
I just thought,
or I'm just...
no, you're doing great. I think it's been super good so far. I just want to add to those three, that list of the three different categories of types of people to work with, that we're gonna put all of that stuff onto, well, as well as having it in the tutor pack, we'll have a sort of live spreadsheet database of them that will update like over the coming weeks and months as we sort of formalize relationships with people a little bit more. Because at the moment we've had sort of initial conversations with people, but some of them will grow into like different types of projects. So there'll be this one place that you can go to see all of these people. Anyway, carry on.
And also as we kind of establish relationships more clearly, we'll make announcements on our Instagram or our website or some kind of our mailing list where you can kind of hear if any new groups join the, I don't want to call it a lineup, that sounds really bad, but they kind of join this kind of group of collaborators.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah, go on.
Okay. And then the other way in which we can, or the other factor to take into account around the types of workshops that could happen next year is time. Most often workshops that happen during EASA start and end during EASA, which is great. I mean, they start slightly before when tutors are doing research on the theme, and they end slightly later when they compile all of the lessons learned into a report. But mainly it happens during those 2 weeks, and the main activities are confined to those 2 weeks. And that's perfectly great and acceptable, but we're also thinking that if some of the projects are quite rooted within a community, they might have goals that are not necessarily achievable in the short-term time frame of the 2 weeks, and that instead we might want to expand a bit further. So you're thinking that there might be, as well as the short-term projects that happen during those 2 weeks, there might be projects that then carry on a program over the rest of August or for a couple of months after, where if you've established a relationship with a community group, activities might carry on taking place, or where part of the workshop might finish on the 13th of August, but other parts of, say if it's the refurbishment of the building, might be done later in the summer by a group that decides to come back, or something along those lines. And finally, that there might also be long-term projects where EASA is almost a very small piece of a longer-term program. So say if a building is being refurbished or a community land trust infrastructure is being established, the 2 weeks during EASA are used as a catalyst where a lot of things get done, or a lot of kind of hands are brought into the project to make something happen, but the project may have started way before or may end years after. And those are all kind of possibilities in time that we welcome. We're not just looking for something that starts and ends in July and August. And this ties very directly with the idea of afterlife and sustainability. Essentially, I think last year EASA did it quite well, and I think as we move through EASA, it's probably worth thinking about where materials go when a workshop comes to an end. So I think it's worth keeping the same requirement as EASA Romania placed last year, which was that all materials used during a workshop should either be dismantled for recycling or reused at the end of the workshop, or should be fixed in their permanent place by the end of the 2 weeks, or by the end of the workshop period, whatever that may be. And it feels like a very small detail, but I really think if we start thinking about it 5 months in advance, it's probably better than if we start thinking about it a week before finalising the workshop proposal. So something to keep in mind. In any case, I'll think there's probably some time for questions, but main things to take away are that over the next coming months, on the 11th of November, as I was saying, later this week, we'll launch the Tutor pack as a digital document, compiling all of the information, and we will also launch an online form which you can complete to express interest and kind of submit any initial ideas you may have, or kind of any, if you feel you're particularly interested in collaborating with one of the groups that speaks today or that we describe in the document, you can express it in the form. Please do this before the 30th of December, and that way we can have a look at all of the different submissions over January and have some process of feedback and start conversations with each of the interested tutors. Between the 3rd and 6th of February, we will be in person in Sheffield with another commoning workshop, hopefully with Robin performing some songs, but mainly getting to know the city, the site, and the local groups or the local bodies that we will have interacted with a bit more by then. Everyone is welcome. We will release more information about that in the new year. And by the end of March next year is when the deadline for detailed workshop applications will be. By then, ideas should be fairly consolidated. That's kind of all, I think.
Great.
Worth saying, just, everything will come on Instagram as it happens. I think we'll just set up a mailing list so everyone can keep in touch. And our website as things go. I don't know, is there anything else? Is there something I've missed?
I think that's a great roundup. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
Okay.
Great job. And yeah, I think the main thing is that we have this extended timeline now to allow for these more long-term embedded projects to happen, but that doesn't mean that you can't propose something that's a little bit lighter touch, theoretical, or I don't know, something that doesn't require as much of a lead up. You can submit that a lot later on. So this is just because we're bringing people in and land in, we have to do this from a lot earlier on. So thanks so much, Lucia. If anyone has I don't know, maybe we should, if anyone has any quick questions, then please go ahead. And otherwise we can move on to Nick Blomley. But if you want to stop sharing and we'll see what's going on. Anyone got anything that they want to what's more mean? Okay, cool. Well, obviously we're going to share all that stuff in the tutor pack anyway. So just let us know. Great. Well,